I got a little bit of a tornado risk for tomorrow that I did want to go over. It is a 2% risk. That is up from a 0% risk this morning, so you could say there is a chance. Also, a little bit of a wind risk and a hail risk, which does make sense given the kind of environment we're looking at. Day after that, maybe some storms in Texas, and nothing beyond that. So we'll go straight to pivotal weather. We can see this is our culprit right here. We got a small but somewhat potent 500 millibar trough, and it does have a closed low, and that is one that's been starting to work its way across the country. And by noon tomorrow, it does work its way into the Ohio River Valley, which is where the tornado risk is. So this is a small trough, and usually for these November, December type tornado setups, which can happen, you want to see a bigger trough, maybe one that stretches all the way across the country, preferably. But this is a small one, and that is leaving a few questions about how high the tornado risk will actually be. One thing we can look at here is check for forcing for storms and see if the storms will be discrete. So we see these lines, these are 500 millibar heights. So that is the height in the atmosphere where the pressure is half of what it is usually at the surface. So what we want to see if we want discrete storms is typically we don't want the heights to fall very much. We've seen that before with setups like December 10th, which produced a high-end EF4 tornado in western Kentucky. We've seen that with the super outbreak, both super outbreaks really. But we do want to see strong winds nonetheless. Alright, so starting off the day in southern Illinois, about 573, and by the end of the day, it's still about 573. So that would be favorable for discrete storms if the setup is favorable for supercells, which I think it might be. So this will also bring in maybe some elevated mixed layer. The issue with this could potentially be the winds aren't very strong at 500 millibars all the way back. We got a 60 knot low-level jet, or not low-level jet, 500 millibar jet here, but only about you trace that back, it only goes to about 35 knots. But with that said, there has been that flow working its way into the area from the desert southwest, which is what you want for a tornado risk. So there's a chance it doesn't really matter too much for an elevated mix layer. 700 millibars, this is something you can look at if you want to forecast any sort of cap that could work its way into the atmosphere. That might limit storm development, and assuming storms fire, which we'll see, they're going to fire somewhere. But if a storm forms, it's probably going to be on its own, which, if there's a tornado risk, one storm would be able to take advantage of the entire risk without being interrupted by anything else. That could mean a stronger tornado potentially. However, that depends on pending a lot of other things going right. Or wrong, I guess. So, zonal flow 700 millibars. That again suggests we could see some sort of cap on the atmosphere, limiting storm development to an extent. So, I mean, usually there's not usually it's not going to be storms not firing that makes a tornado risk not happening in this time of year in this area. But it's possible for this. Just not a lot of forcing in general. Low level jet, this is very important for tornadoes. So, in a perfect world, for a tornado risk, you'd want to see a closed low, strong winds to. Basically, you want to see that closed low to the west of the risk, and you want that strong level jet to feed in the inflow for the storm. So by 3 o'clock tomorrow, this is what we're looking at, and this is a little interesting. Here's the low at 850 millibars. It isn't to the west very much of the risk. It's kind of just straight to the north. And that does lead to quite veered winds at the lowest levels, which that's going to probably decrease the tornado risk a bit. You can see the strongest flow in the area might honestly be early afternoon, which would be interesting. But 45 knot low level jet, that's not bad. It's just pointing in a direction that maybe limits the tornado risk. We'll check the critical angles in a second. So overall, just from looking at this, I mean, we can look at dew point. That's probably smart to look at. But from the upper air maps, it looks like a decent tornado risk. But it doesn't scream major tornado outbreak to me. So 21Z, this is something to note. We see at 21Z, we remember the 850 millibar low was to the north, but the surface low is to the west. So that what that could potentially do is means it might mean there's going to be directional shear in the lowest kilometer, which might actually decrease the tornado risk because it tampers with those low-level thermodynamics. You kind of want to see somewhat humid air at the surface, and right above that you want moist air, so really humid air. That's usually what's most favorable for tornadoes, not always, but that might decrease the overall low-level instability to an extent and increase those LFCs. Storms might not be able to become surface-based quite as easily. But at the same time, it might not matter too much. It often doesn't. But one thing to note here, too, is we do see pretty weak surface winds, especially up here. I know it's near the surface low, but it's still pretty weak. Weaker than you'd want to see for a tornado risk. I mean, we got 5 knots here. So what that tells me is low-level winds aren't exactly what we wanted for a tornado risk. What you want to see if you wanted a tornado risk. Yeah, kind of a weird one, but that could decrease the tornado risk. Let's just go to the HRRR now. We'll go reflectivity and we'll get a little closer look. So storms right now in St. Louis. While we're waiting for the rest to load, we can check the tornado risk, and we see there is basically no tornado risk if this is a correct sounding, because what is it, 24 dew point at the surface. These storms are going to be super elevated. No tornado risk there if this is accurate. This might be north of a warm front or something. Alright, moving on. You can see... Okay, bit weird. You got these early morning storms that kind of work their way through Illinois. Check what's going on with those. Those are probably going to be elevated, so there won't be a tornado risk early on in the day with these storms, most likely, because those storms are just not going to be surface-based. So this is north of the warm front. Then we see a second wave of storms, but they are pretty far north, which is interesting to note. And that might be north of the warm front, and it kind of is. So, and that's one of the things I was talking about. Those weak surface winds might lead to the storms being a little more elevated because that warm front doesn't lift north as far. And so with those weak surface winds, I mean, we can see there's no surface wind really here at all. That's going to greatly make the tornado risk quite conditional. And, I mean, it says 188.3 Cape, but in reality, that we need the warm front to lift a little further north. So let's check where that warm front actually is. So temperatures right now near 6 o'clock, 53 degrees. That's going to be increasing a little bit. And we do see pretty well-defined warm front right here. And once again, those weak surface winds that could potentially limit the tornado risk. We don't get those. I mean, it's 80 degrees out here. Let's take a look at what's going on here. Yeah, look at that. 80 degrees, steep lapse rates, strong elevated mix layer. But you don't get those high temperatures to wrap around very much because the surface low just doesn't want to do it. And yeah, the kind of a cold front it turns into. So what that could mean is maybe the tornado risk ends up being a little more back here if we get storms to form there. And look at that. Look at that capping inversion. You don't always see that this time of year. Okay, this is probably the best we've seen so far, and that is far southern Illinois at around 3 o'clock. Strong elevated mix layer, favorable for stronger storms. There is a little bit of that cap. LFC is 2 kilometers up, so yeah, a little bit of a cap in there, so that could potentially limit storm development, especially considering we're not seeing strong 500 millibar height falls. But the hodograph, that's not bad. See, like we were talking about, stronger winds on the backside of the low, which is a little bit more favorable for those low-level thermodynamics. And we see strong deep layer shear, favorable for supercells. So yeah, this is a really interesting one because it could be a day where we get storms to fire up here that are north of the warm front and nothing happens. But if we can get storms to fire further south, south of the warm front, where we have pretty strong instability, especially for this time of year, we could see supercells capable of producing a few tornadoes. Can't even rule out a strong one, although this is just a really, really weird risk. So, highest risk would probably be southeast Missouri, southern Illinois, and maybe if the warm front gets there, southern Indiana. So yeah, this is going to be a type of risk that's going to depend strongly on the warm front, which is going to be influenced by the surface low. If we get a strong surface low, we could see a tornado risk, maybe even a strong tornado, although the risk is so conditional, I'm hesitant to say that. While we can, let's take a look at another model, see what it's thinking. So this is a RFS, it's a newer model, may or may not be accurate. It does show those storms going through St. Louis, which is what happened. This is weird. We get storms over here at night. This is 3 a.m. I don't know how accurate that is. That might be elevated anyway. Let's go to our main risk. Oh, wow. Look at this. We get storms to fire, supercells to fire in the St. Louis area. They work, like, look at this. They work their way into southern Illinois. These are discrete storms. And yeah, that's an interesting look. It is the RFS, so sometimes it just goes crazy. Let's check this. This is 28 hours out from this run. Where is the warm front? So it's a little iffy. We can also go to surface-based CAPE, which is probably the kind of CAPE you want to look for in this situation. And it is north of that favorable CAPE. So what that tells me is that even though it shows a strong rotation track, that storm could be elevated, which means there could be hail, but probably not a tornado. So yeah, that once again shows how conditional this risk is, really. These storms down here, see this one, far southern Illinois. Where's that with the warm front? That's in a better position. So, what I see from this is you could get storms to fire. They might be supercells, but further north the further north you go, the lower the tornado risk might be, because that warm front might not be able to bring in that low-level instability and that surface-based instability. But further to the south, where you also get stronger surface winds, that is where you could see storms a little more likely to be surface-based. So I think the highest tornado risk is going to be in the Kentucky, Illinois, Missouri triple point. That's probably where I'd put the highest tornado risk for tomorrow. Can't rule out a strong tornado, but once again, it's just such a conditional risk. It could be a day where you get a big tornado. It could be a day where nothing happens. There's a lot going into this, but it is something I wanted to look over, and yeah, I'll be keeping an eye on tomorrow, seeing what's gonna happen. So anyway, thanks for watching. See you in the next one.